What would you do if, just 3 weeks before your wedding, the real estate agent called to confirm the house contract? By reading your rival's name? Pushed to the edge, she orchestrated an unimaginable revenge. This is the best revenge story you will ever hear. The late afternoon sun poured liquid gold through the window, bathing the ivory silk wedding gown in a heavenly, ethereal glow. Linda Carter gently traced the soft fabric, a subconscious smile playing on her lips. In just 3 weeks, she would wear this dress, walk down the aisle to William Morris, and begin a new chapter of her life as Linda Hamilton. In the sun-drenched penthouse apartment they had built together, the future seemed a solid, beautiful promise, as elegant as the invitations she was carefully addressing. Her phone vibrated, breaking the tranquil silence. It was William. "Darling," his voice came through, but with a cool distance she couldn't quite name. "I'm sorry, but we'll have to cancel dinner tonight. A last-minute consultation with Professor Peaton came up. It's critical for the new project." A flicker of disappointment touched Linda's heart, but she quickly brushed it aside. "It's okay, honey. Work comes first." She was used to these lonely nights, the last-minute cancellations. It was the price of loving a brilliant and ambitious surgeon. "You're the best," he said, his tone like that of a doctor praising a compliant patient. "We'll talk later." The call ended as abruptly as it began. Linda put down her pen, a vague sense of unease creeping into her mind. She told herself she was just being overly sensitive before the wedding. But then the phone rang again. A landline this time. The voice on the other end was as sharp as broken glass, and utterly unmistakable. "Linda," said Eleanor Hamilton, William's mother, "I need you to come to the house immediately. There are some important matters regarding the wedding we need to discuss." There was no greeting, no warmth. It was a summons, not an invitation. A chill ran down Linda's spine, but she quickly changed and drove to the luxurious Hamilton family estate, a place where she had never truly felt welcome. The heavy oak door was opened not by the butler, but by another woman. Victoria Peaton, daughter of the pharmaceutical magnate Marcus Peaton, stood there in a cream-colored silk dress, a smile on her lips that was polished to the perfection of a diamond, and was just as cold. But it wasn't Victoria's arrogant beauty that made Linda's breath catch in her throat. It was the shimmering object resting on her long, elegant neck. Her grandmother's pearl necklace. It was the only heirloom, the last valuable thing her grandmother had left her before cancer took her away. Last month, William had held her, comforted her when it had mysteriously disappeared. He had even gone with her to file a police report. Now, it rested against Victoria's skin, arrogant and natural, as if it were born to be there. Each pearl seemed to mock Linda's pain and her blind trust. "Where's William?" Linda's voice was dry and foreign, yet surprisingly steady. Victoria shrugged, a gesture of lethal elegance. "He's upstairs with Mother and my father, reviewing the prenuptial agreement. Ours, of course." She stepped aside, gesturing for Linda to enter as if she were already the lady of the house. Inside the living room, a silent tribunal awaited her. Eleanor sat in her brocaded wingback chair, sipping tea. Beside her sat Marcus Peaton himself, a man whose power radiated from him like heat. On the glass coffee table, the wedding invitations Linda had handwritten were scattered about. A red pen had viciously struck through the name Linda Marie Carter and scrawled Victoria Ann Peaton above it. Linda's world shattered into a million pieces. "This is for the best," Eleanor said, not bothering to stand. "You must see that." William descended the staircase, his expression as calm and cruel as a winter sky. He was wearing the Tom Ford suit she had bought him for his promotion. He was the man she loved, except for his eyes. They were dead. They looked at her as if she were a complicated case that needed to be managed. "Everything has been arranged," he announced, his voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. "The apartment lease will be transferred solely to my name." Your belongings will be professionally packed and put into storage. The venue has been notified. Although we will be keeping the date for a different purpose. A different purpose. They were getting married on our wedding day. The pain was so sharp it was physical, and she had to grip the back of a chair to keep from collapsing. And the ring, Eleanor commanded, her cold eyes fixed on Linda's left hand. It's a family heirloom. It must stay in the family. Linda instinctively clenched her fist, protecting the diamond she had worn with such pride and hope. But William was already holding out his hand, patient as a doctor waiting for compliance. Linda, don't make this more difficult than it needs to be, he said, using the same placating tone he used on difficult patients. Our relationship has run its course. Victoria and I share career goals, family connections. Our futures are more aligned. Since when? She whispered. Victoria laughed, a tinkling sound like breaking crystal. Oh, darling, these things aren't decided. They simply become clear. 2 months. Linda realized with sickening clarity, all the late-night emergency surgeries, the sudden weekend conferences, the credit card bills from expensive restaurants she had never been to. The pieces of his deception now fit together into a perfect picture of betrayal. Her trembling hands removed the ring. She placed it on the side table next to Eleanor's teacup. It made a small, dry click, like a final, merciless punctuation mark. Their arrangement was perfect, surgical. They didn't just want to end the relationship. They wanted to erase her, to excise her from William's life as cleanly as a tumor. Her job, her home, her finances, her dignity, all had been scheduled for removal. She didn't remember the drive back to the apartment. No, William's apartment. The world was a blur of pain and tears. Inside, his cologne still lingered in the air, a ghostly presence. And then she saw them. Cardboard boxes, neatly stacked in a corner, each bearing Eleanor's perfect, looping handwriting. Linda's kitchenware. Linda's personal documents. Linda's miscellaneous. The purge had been prepared for weeks. That night, she sat on the cold floor, facing the brutal reality on her laptop screen. The bank account was nearly empty. Over $15,000 in non-refundable deposits for the venue, the flowers, the catering. Her credit cards were maxed out from the surprise honeymoon she had booked, the gifts for the bridesmaids. He had laid a perfect financial trap, ensuring that when he walked away, she would be left with nothing. In the depths of despair, with the world closing in, one name appeared in her contacts: Dorothy Martinez, her foster mother, her last refuge. Her fingers trembled as she pressed the call button, shame giving way to desperation. Linda, what's wrong, sweetheart? Dorothy's warm, familiar voice was a lifeline. A sob escaped Linda's throat, and in that one sound, Dorothy understood everything. Come home. I'm already putting the kettle on. Dorothy's small house, on a quiet street that smelled of lavender and old books, was a sanctuary that had sheltered countless broken children like her. Dorothy didn't press for details. She simply helped Linda carry the cruelly labeled boxes into the guest room, handed her the old chipped blue mug that had always been hers, and filled it with chamomile tea. When the last of the tears had fallen, Linda managed to tell her everything. Dorothy just listened, holding her in a steady, safe embrace. 3 days later, Linda was still in a fog of grief, numbly scrolling through job listings. Her future was a gray, impenetrable wall. That evening, Dorothy came into her room with a cup of tea and a file folder. My cousin from the Hartman Placement Agency called, she said gently. There's a position that's been open for months. It's unusual. She placed the folder on the bed. The salary made Linda blink twice. $15,000 a month, plus room, board, and full benefits. Triple her hospital salary. What's the catch? Linda asked, because there was always a catch with offers that seemed too good to be true. The patient is Nathaniel Blackwood. The name struck Linda. Nathaniel Blackwood, the tech prodigy paralyzed in a skiing accident, who had vanished from the business world 8 months ago. William used to read about him with unconcealed admiration. Dorothy hesitated. They say he's difficult, almost impossible. 4 nurses have quit in 2 months. But Linda, the money. It could give you a completely new start. As Linda stared at the name Nathaniel Blackwood, Dorothy sighed softly, a distant sadness in her eyes. I know that name, she said quietly. I was a nurse for his mother, Elizabeth, in her final days. Linda looked up, stunned. Dorothy gazed out the window, lost in memory. A wonderful woman. Nathaniel was just a boy then, extraordinarily brilliant but so lonely, especially after his mother passed. He had to grow up in a world of sharks circling his family's legacy. She turned back to Linda, her eyes full of a profound understanding. That boy, even as a billionaire now, probably still needs someone who can see the real person behind the thorny walls. Dorothy's words planted a strange seed in Linda's heart. This was no longer just a job to run away to. It felt like an invisible thread of fate, a chance not just to earn a living, but to find herself again in a place where no one knew her, caring for a man who, perhaps like her, was hiding his own scars. She picked up the file. Her hand was no longer shaking. She had made her decision. The chauffeured car carried Linda through progressively wealthier neighborhoods, where houses became estates, and estates became small kingdoms behind stone walls and iron gates. The Blackwood estate appeared like a fortress of glass and steel, cold and majestic, a masterpiece of modern architecture that housed a wounded soul. The estate's manager, Margaret Harrison, was a woman with hair the color of steel and the demeanor of a general. The interview was brief and sharp. She didn't ask about Linda's nursing skills. Her resume spoke for itself. She asked about her limits. Why do you want this position, Miss Carter? Because my life here has become untenable, Linda answered, the raw honesty surprising even herself. I need to disappear. Margaret studied her, her gray eyes missing nothing. And can you handle a man who has turned bitterness into a weapon? Linda thought of Victoria's smile, of William's dead eyes. I can handle anything that isn't the life I just lost. Nathaniel Blackwood was more than the rumors described. He sat in a high-tech wheelchair, his back to the door, his silhouette framed by the afternoon sun. His beauty was dangerous, like a flawless Greek statue that had been cracked from within. Another one, he said, his voice deep and sharp, without turning around. Margaret must be getting desperate if she's scraping the bottom of the barrel. His cruelty might have stung another person, but Linda had been forged in the fires of betrayal. She walked forward, the sound of her heels clicking purposefully. I'm Linda Carter, your new nurse. He spun the wheelchair around. His stormy gray eyes bored into her, searching for a weakness to exploit. What tragedy sent you running here? Divorce? Debt? Or are you the noble type who thinks caring for the broken will fill the void in your empty life? My fiancé left me for Victoria Peaton, she replied flatly, her voice devoid of emotion. I'm here because I have nowhere else to go. But I'm also here because I am excellent at my job. And frankly, Mr. Blackwood, your bitterness doesn't intimidate me. A flicker of surprise crossed his features. He was used to tears, pity, or fear. He was not used to this thorny composure. The next few days were a battle of wills. He challenged every medical procedure, refused all assistance, and used words as sharp as scalpels to test her limits. But Linda responded with cool professionalism, documenting every refusal, performing every task with precision, giving him no emotional opening. Then, one sleepless night, when the silence of the mansion became too heavy, Linda heard strange sounds. The clang of metal, the ragged sound of strained breathing, coming from the locked private gym. Curiosity overpowering caution, she pushed the door open. The sight inside stole her breath. Between two parallel bars, Nathaniel Blackwood was standing. Standing on his own 2 feet. The muscles in his arms were taut, sweat soaking his t-shirt, his face contorted in a mask of sheer pain and ferocious determination. He took one slow, agonizing step, and then another. He wasn't completely paralyzed. He sensed her presence instantly. He snapped his head up, and the fury in his eyes was volcanic. "Get out," he snarled. But Linda didn't move. She saw something familiar in that rage. The desperate need to control one's own story. The fear of being seen at your most vulnerable. "Since when?" was all she asked. The arrival of the convoy of black sedans the next morning shattered any remaining tension between them. The license plate PMG001 was a brand from the devil himself. Marcus Peaton. "They're early," Nathaniel said, his face hardening to granite. He quickly got back into his wheelchair, pulling the blanket over his legs, transforming back into the image of the broken genius the world knew. "You? Disappear. Use the service corridor." Through a crack in the door, Linda watched the people who had destroyed her life stride in. Marcus, Victoria, and William, now cloaked in the confidence of a conqueror. She heard William in his professional, compassionate tone, read his falsified diagnosis. The paralysis is permanent, with no potential for recovery. She heard Marcus make his insulting acquisition offer, treating Nathaniel like an expired commodity. After they left, leaving a toxic silence in their wake, Nathaniel didn't say a word. He wheeled himself into his study. Linda followed. The door slammed shut behind them. "They brought your ex-fiancé," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "to lie about my condition." "William has always been good at lying," Linda replied, the familiar bitter taste rising in her throat. "I just realized it too late." Nathaniel turned, looking directly at her. His suspicion and defenses were gone, replaced by a cold, shared purpose. "Tell me everything." His study transformed into a war room. Screens displayed lines of code and encrypted data files. They began the excavation of the ruins of betrayal. And then, while tracing Marcus Peaton's financial trail, Linda found something far more sinister than fraud. A folder labeled Alpine Project, containing encrypted payments to a private security firm in Switzerland. Nathaniel looked at the firm's name, and his face went pale. "That's the company that was in charge of resort security. The day of my accident, they spent 2 days and nights breaking the encryption. When the files were finally unlocked, the horrifying truth made the air in the room seem to crystallize. A massive payment had been transferred to the resort's head of security 2 days after Nathaniel's accident, along with a short, chilling email: "Job complete. Target neutralized." The accident had been staged. It was a failed assassination attempt. "They," Nathaniel whispered, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and the validation of a fear he had never dared to name. "They tried to kill me." Linda instinctively placed her hand on his. They were no longer just allies in a business war. They were survivors. Aware that the Pettons would not stop, they grew more cautious. As expected, a week later, a new housekeeper named Clara arrived. She was too eager, too curious, her eyes always darting towards Nathaniel's study. It took Margaret one day to confirm their suspicions. Clara had a shadowy connection to a Peaton Pharmaceuticals subsidiary. "We have to fire her," Nathaniel said. "No," Linda shook her head, a daring idea forming. "We'll give them a show." And so the game of cat and mouse began. The next day, Clara accidentally overheard Linda on the phone with Dorothy, sobbing about how she missed William and was terrified of Nathaniel's temper. A few days later, Clara happened to witness Nathaniel in a rage, throwing a file on the floor and screaming at Margaret about the company's plummeting stock price and how he was about to lose everything. Bits of calculated disinformation were planted, making their prey increasingly arrogant and certain that victory was within their grasp. They had evidence of fraud, evidence of attempted murder, But to destroy William in front of the board, they needed a direct strike against his medical credibility, something irrefutable. And then, it arrived. An email, sent to Nathaniel's highest-level encrypted inbox. No sender name, only a subject line. A teacher's disappointment. Inside was a short message from Dr. Alistair Finch, the respected professor who had mentored William in his early career. He wrote that he could not stand by and watch his former student desecrate the Hippocratic Oath. He requested a meeting. They met in a secluded corner of the medical university's library, surrounded by the scent of old paper and dusty knowledge. Dr. Finch was an elderly man with tired but righteous eyes. The pain and disappointment were etched onto his face. "I treated him like a son," he said, his voice hoarse. "But ambition turned him into a monster. He boasted to me, Linda." He called his medical report on Mr. Blackwood a necessary piece of corporate theater. He pushed a small USB drive across the table. "On this is a recording of that conversation. Use it to stop him, before he does any more harm." On the drive back to the estate, neither of them spoke. The tiny USB drive sat in Linda's palm, yet it felt as heavy as the fate of an empire. They had their silver bullet. The chess game was about to end. It was time for checkmate. The air outside the Blackwood Industries headquarters felt electric. Nathaniel Blackwood emerged from the car, not in the helplessness of a wheelchair, but on his own 2 feet, leaning lightly on a cane of polished ebony with a silver handle. He was no longer hiding. He was a predator returning to reclaim his territory. Linda walked beside him, the portfolio in her hand containing the weight of a final judgment. When the mahogany doors to the boardroom swung open, time seemed to freeze. The 12 board members, along with Marcus, Victoria, and William, all turned. A collective, audible gasp filled the room. The click of Nathaniel's cane on the marble floor echoed like a judge's gavel. He walked, step by deliberate step, the length of the room. His eyes locked on the chairman's seat currently occupied by Marcus Peaton. Marcus's face drained of all color. Victoria dropped her pen. But the most satisfying reaction belonged to William. He shot to his feet reflexively, his legs trembling as if to flee, before collapsing back into his chair, his face a mask of disbelief. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen," Nathaniel said, his voice resonant with authority as he reached the head of the table. "I believe there has been a grave misunderstanding regarding my capabilities." Marcus was the first to find his voice, though it was strangled with shock. You can walk?" "A keen observation, Marcus," Nathaniel replied, a cold smile touching his lips, "though according to the medical assessment by Dr. Morris here, that should be impossible." All eyes turned to William, who was shrinking in his chair. Nathaniel gave him no quarter. He began his presentation, a perfectly calculated execution. He displayed the evidence of corporate espionage, the shell companies in the Cayman Islands, the insider trading. Marcus tried to bluster, but his voice grew weaker against the irrefutable proof. Then, Nathaniel moved to the next blow. But the Peaton family's greed, it seems, does not stop at money. He projected the documents from the Alpine Project folder. The evidence of the suspicious payment, the falsified safety report, a detailed plan to neutralize him. The atmosphere in the room shifted from a business dispute to a criminal trial. Board members began to physically edge their chairs away from the Peaton family. "This is all circumstantial," Victoria cried out, her composure finally shattering. "Is it?" Nathaniel said. "Then perhaps we should hear a professional opinion from Dr. Morris himself." He gave a signal, and from the room's state-of-the-art sound system, a familiar voice filled the stunned silence. William's voice. Arrogant, boastful, and damning. "It's just a report, Alistair. Sometimes you have to do what's necessary. Think of it as a necessary piece of corporate theater." The recording ended. William sat there, his face ashen, His career and future turned to dust before his eyes. In his desperation, his eyes found the one person in the room he thought he could appeal to. Linda, you don't understand everything. This was her moment. Linda stepped forward. She placed the portfolio on the table with a definitive thud. She looked directly at William, not with the eyes of a spurned lover, but of a judge. "Oh, I understand better than you think, William," she said, her voice calm but ice cold. "I understand that you violated your oath. I understand that you sold the trust of your patient and of your mentor. You traded your soul for a bet you had already lost from the start. You didn't just lose me, you lost yourself." When the lawyer, Patricia Coleman, presented the legal documents, there was no fight left in them. They signed, their hands shaking, ending their own empire under the watchful eyes of the board. As they stumbled out of the room, broken and disgraced, the door clicked shut behind them, closing a dark chapter forever. 6 months later, the Blackwood Carter Rehabilitation Center was nearly complete, a modern beacon of hope and innovation. But the past has a way of casting one last, long shadow. Just a week before the grand opening, a tabloid newspaper exploded with a front-page story, its headline screaming in lurid letters, "The gold-digging nurse, the crippled billionaire, and the broken-hearted doctor." William, with nothing left to lose, had sold his final asset, a twisted, venomous version of their story. He painted Linda as a manipulative predator who had dumped her devoted fiancé to ensnare a vulnerable billionaire. He used private details, tender words she had once trusted him with, and warped them into weapons. A media firestorm erupted. Donors expressed concern. Whispers started among the staff. Nathaniel was furious, but his first act was to go to Linda. "We'll crush them," he said, his voice tight with rage. But Linda shook her head. In her eyes, there was no longer any fear. "No," she said, "I ran once. This time, I'll face him, in front of everyone." They called a press conference in the sunlit atrium of the nearly finished center. Facing a sea of cameras and microphones, Nathaniel spoke first. His statement was brief and powerful. "I am here today to say only one thing," he declared, his voice unwavering. "Linda Carter is the most honorable, brilliant, and courageous person I have ever known. She is the soul of this institution. Anyone who attacks her, attacks me, and everything we stand to build." He stepped back, giving her the floor. Linda took a deep breath, looking directly into the flashing lights. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She told her story. The truth. About the pearl necklace, the labeled boxes, the financial trap. She presented the proof. She concluded with a message more powerful than any accusation. "My story isn't about a broken heart. It is about finding strength when you think you have nothing left. It's about being able to stand up after you have been knocked down. And that is exactly what this Blackwood Carter Center will offer our patients. We don't heal scars here. We help people find their strength from them." Her dignity and sincerity were undeniable. The media narrative flipped instantly, turning from a scandal into a story of resilience and triumph. William's final, desperate act of revenge had backfired, becoming the most powerful publicity campaign the center could have ever wished for. The grand opening was a resounding success. Dorothy stood in the crowd, wiping away tears of pride. Linda and Nathaniel cut the ceremonial ribbon together, hand in hand. A few weeks later, during a sunset the color of amber, Nathaniel led Linda for a walk along the private beach below the estate. The waves gently lapped at the shore. He stopped, turning to face her. "I'm not asking you to marry me because I need you," he said, his voice soft as he opened a small box. Inside was a simple, elegant sapphire ring. "I'm asking because I've learned that the best revenge is to build a happy life that those who hurt us can never touch. Build it with me, Linda." Not from desperation, but from choice. She didn't wait for him to ask. She took the ring herself and slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. A month later, Linda was at the center, a proud smile on her face as she watched Jamie, their first patient, take her first tentative, unassisted steps. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from an unknown number, but the preview showed the name William Morris, with the first few words of a plea, "I was wrong. Talk." Linda looked at the screen for a moment, a fleeting memory of another life, another person. Then, with a serene smile, she deleted the message without opening it. She put her phone away and walked forward to take Jamie's hand, helping her take the next step into her future. The past was finally buried in the sand, washed away by the tide of a new life.